Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking military historian Victor Davis Hanson's fascinating analysis of the geopolitical chess match currently unfolding between the United States and Iran. We're going to break down the strategies, the intense constraints, and honestly, the inevitable climax of this high-stakes standoff. Let's get right to it.
It's kind of the ultimate question, isn't it? Who blinks first in a geopolitical standoff? According to the analysis we're looking at, we are rapidly entering the final chapter, literally the epilogue, of this specific conflict cycle. You see, the active, unpredictable military questions, those have actually already been answered. What we're left with is a very tense waiting game. But as you'll see, it's a waiting game with an incredibly tight, absolutely unavoidable deadline.
So, the crucial point is captured perfectly in this quote from the source material. These are two fixed objects in collision, right? This isn't some fluid negotiation where both sides have endless room to maneuver. Instead, Hanson frames this as a standoff driven entirely by ticking clocks on both sides. Neither side can afford to just sit back and maintain the status quo indefinitely, which practically guarantees that a collision isn't just possible, it's virtually inevitable.
To understand exactly why time is running out, we really need to look at the timeline. The analysis points out that we are over 60 days into this heightened period of conflict. But the really interesting marker, that happened back at day 40. By day 40, the core military capability questions were largely resolved by the United States. The initial military threat posed by Iran was effectively neutralized, which fundamentally shifted the entire nature of how this standoff is playing out.
Right, so if that immediate military threat suppressed, the United States completely shifted its strategy toward aggressive economic coercion. And we're not just talking about your standard run-of-the-mill sanctions here. We're talking about canceled international bank accounts, massively frozen assets abroad, and the physical interruption of commercial tankers trying to move goods on the high seas. It's a suffocating economic blockade designed to force a definitive breaking point.
Section 1. Iran's ticking clock.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Iran is trying to survive this blockade. They're relying heavily on stall tactics. Because the status quo is essentially an economic death warrant for them, they just try to drag things out. They drop little hints of possible negotiations. They dangle fake concessions as bait. The whole goal is to get the U.S. to take the hook, spend 4 or 5 days negotiating, realize it's a total ruse, get frustrated, and back off. All while Iran is desperately relying on smuggling goods via rail, land routes, or the Caspian Sea, just to keep the lights on.
But here's the thing. Smuggling is not a sustainable national economic policy. Hanson's timeline emphasizes a really stark reality for Iran. They can only sustain this level of economic pressure for roughly another 2 to 4 weeks. The math simply doesn't work in their favor. Within a month, the analysis suggests their economy will practically explode. That is a brutal, immovable time constraint literally forcing their hand.
Section 2. America's time constraints.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the U.S. can't simply wait forever either. The administration is under immense domestic and global pressure. Look at the gauntlet of constraints Donald Trump is facing. The legal limits of the War Powers Act, the fast-approaching midterm elections, the constant threat of spiking global gas prices that could trigger a domestic recession, not to mention mounting pressure from Western allies in Europe and Asia who just want this resolved. These pressures form a hard, absolute ceiling on how long the U.S. can keep this up.
When we juxtapose these two strategies, the core paradox of this entire conflict becomes crystal clear. Iran is banking on the idea that they can use stall tactics just long enough for U.S. domestic political pressures to force America to back down. Meanwhile, the U.S. is betting that its economic blockade will completely collapse Iran's economy first. They both fundamentally believe they have more time than the other side. But, they literally can't both be right.
Section 3. The 3 unbreakable demands.
So the analysis reminds us to look back at the core reasons the United States initiated this current intervention in the first place. It was never about putting boots on the ground or forcing regime change. It boiled down to 3 very specific demands. Number 1, absolutely halt the enrichment of uranium to prevent the creation of a nuclear bomb. Number 2, stop launching missiles at regional adversaries. And number 3, end the subsidies to terror networks like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. The source also notes a broader, underlying American demand here, which is an end to 47 years of Iranian-backed attacks on U.S. citizens, embassies, and soldiers.
And here is exactly where the diplomatic gears grind to a total halt. As Hanson points out, Iran will likely never accept these terms. Why? Because conceding to these specific demands would require them to abandon their revolutionary, theocratic identity. That identity is the literal reason the regime exists. So, to give in to the U.S. demands isn't just a policy shift for them, it's a fundamental erasure of who they are. Because of that, a true diplomatic resolution is practically impossible.
Section 4. The predicted collision.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because Hanson predicts a very specific chain reaction is going to unfold over the coming weeks. First, the U.S. forces open the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic, basically signaling to Wall Street that oil flows are secure. In response, Iran, desperate and totally backed into a corner, will harass those ships with small boats and potentially launch missiles into the Gulf to threaten oil capacity. And finally, the U.S. will use that reaction as the justification to completely and permanently destroy Iran's remaining economic and military capacity.
The analysis even anticipates the exact target list for this final collision. The U.S. would likely wipe out the port facilities on Kharg Island, totally eliminating their maritime infrastructure. They destroy the small boats and whatever missile capacity is left. We might even see strikes on dual-use targets like bridges and power plants, similar to strategies used historically in Serbia or Libya. And crucially, without ever sending ground troops, the U.S. would rely on intensive, heavy bombing to seal off known uranium sites. It effectively cripples the regime's infrastructure while leaving the potential for internal regime change up to the Iranian people themselves.
But you might be wondering, why trigger this violent collision now? Why not just wait it out? Well, it all comes back to a single number: 6. The analysis argues that this highly aggressive timeline is dictated by the U.S. administration needing roughly 5 to 6 months for the American economy to completely rebound before the midterm elections. If the conflict is resolved, even violently, but quickly, in the next few weeks, oil prices drop, Wall Street recovers, and the economy is roaring again right by election time.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Ultimately, how do domestic political clocks dictate the timeline of international conflict? What we've seen through this breakdown isn't just a story about foreign policy. It's a vivid illustration of how looming elections, the fear of a domestic recession, and literally the price of gas at home can set the countdown timer for a military collision abroad. It's a fascinating look at the hidden gears of global standoffs. Thanks for joining me to unpack this analysis, and keep these breakdowns in mind the next time you see headlines about ticking clocks on the global stage.